The altimeter was unwinding like a broken clock, and I remember thinking, in that exact moment, with the hydraulic fluid spraying across my visor and the aircraft rotating maybe 40 degrees per second, I remember thinking that the sound of the warning horns was almost musical. That's what your brain does when it decides you're already dead. It finds something beautiful in the noise. I pulled the primary ejection handle, the one that's supposed to fire both seats simultaneously. The canopy went. I felt the rush of 700-mile-per-hour air hit my face like a concrete wall. My seat fired. The explosive charge detonated beneath me and I was out. I was clear of the aircraft, and I was already turning in the harness to look back. And the rear cockpit was still there, still intact, still falling with the aircraft. There was a half-second of silence on the intercom channel, a half-second where I heard nothing but wind and the distant howl of what used to be two perfectly functioning Pratt & Whitney engines. And then his voice came through, steady as a Sunday morning. He said, "It didn't fire." 3 words, completely calm, like he was reading an instrument gauge. I want you to understand something before I go any further, because people hear a story like this and they assign roles immediately. The man who lived and the man who didn't. They cast you as the lucky one without understanding that luck has nothing to do with it. What happened in that cockpit, what happened in those final seconds, was not luck. It was not fate. It was a sequence of mechanical failures and human decisions that I have reconstructed in my mind every single night for 41 years. So let me take you back. Let me take you back before the fire. Daniel Cruz and I had been flying together for 3 years by the time we took that mission. 3 years sounds like a number until you understand what 3 years in a 2-seat fighter aircraft actually means. It means 6,000 hours of shared airspace. It means you have been 3 feet behind this man at twice the speed of sound, at 40,000 feet, in the black of night, with nothing between you and empty atmosphere but a 1/4 inch of canopy glass. The F-4 Phantom is not a small aircraft. It is not a quiet aircraft. It is not, by any rational measure, a comfortable aircraft. It burns through fuel at a rate that punishes inattention. Its hydraulic systems are complex enough that a single failed line can turn a precision instrument into an aerodynamic brick. The engines sit directly beneath you and they generate enough heat that on long missions you can feel it through the seat pan, through your flight suit, into the back of your thighs. And in the rear cockpit of that aircraft sits the man whose job it is to keep you alive. The RIO, the radar intercept officer, is not a passenger. That distinction matters enormously to me, and I will not have it minimized. Daniel was not a passenger. He was the aircraft's nervous system. While I managed the physical act of flying, the stick, the throttle, the raw kinesthetic conversation between my hands and 40,000 pounds of airframe, Daniel was managing everything else. The radar picture, the threat environment, the weapons systems, the electronic countermeasures. He was processing information at a rate that would overwhelm most people, feeding it to me in calm, precise call-outs, filtering the chaos into something I could use. We had a language that we had built together over 3 years, not a formal language, not something from a manual, a language of small things, the way he would add a half-beat of silence before a threat call-out that he considered serious, the way I would roll slightly left before a descent to tell him we were going down without breaking radio discipline, the way he would key the intercom twice quickly when he wanted me to check my fuel state without saying the words out loud. You cannot manufacture that language. You cannot train it in a simulator. It grows in the space between two people who have decided without ever saying it directly, that they will not let the other one die. Daniel was from Beaumont, Texas. He had a wife named Carol and a daughter who was 4 years old when we flew that mission. He had a gap between his two front teeth, and he laughed at things that weren't funny, and he took his coffee black with exactly 1 sugar, and he could brief a threat environment in 40 seconds with a precision that made senior officers stop talking mid-sentence to listen. He was 31 years old. The mission itself was not unusual. That is one of the things that still sits wrong with me, even now. It was not supposed to be the mission. There was no intelligence suggesting elevated surface-to-air threat density along our ingress route. We had flown that corridor before. The threat picture was assessed as moderate, which in the language of the period meant present but manageable. It meant that the systems we carried and the tactics we employed should be sufficient to prosecute the mission and return the aircraft. We were at approximately 22,000 feet in a shallow descent toward the target area when Daniel's voice came through the intercom with that specific half-beat of silence before the words. He said, "Spike, 2 o'clock, SA-2 variant. He's got us." I broke right immediately, dispensed countermeasures. The aircraft responded the way it always responded, clean, obedient, precise, and I thought for a moment that we had broken the lock. Daniel said, "Still tracking," and I broke harder, dispensed again, and the aircraft was performing exactly as we had trained it to perform. I never heard the missile. That is the thing that no film has ever gotten right. You do not hear it coming. There is no whistle, no dramatic approach tone. There is simply the aircraft, flying, and then there is a pressure wave that begins somewhere aft of the left engine and moves forward through the airframe in approximately 1/5 of a second. And in that 1/5 of a second, the aircraft stops being an aircraft and starts being a collection of parts that happen to be moving in roughly the same direction. The hydraulic pressure gauges went to 0 simultaneously, both of them. When you see both hydraulic gauges go to 0 at the same moment, you have a specific, practiced response to that sight. Your hands go to specific places. Your eyes go to specific instruments. Your brain begins running a specific checklist. But first, for just a fraction of a second, before the training takes over, your brain registers what it is actually seeing, which is that you are in an aircraft with no hydraulic systems, which means no flight controls, which means you are no longer flying, you are falling. The aircraft entered a roll to the left that I could not counter. The nose came down. The horizon, which a moment before had been a clean line dividing blue sky from brown earth, was now a rotating reference point that made no spatial sense. I could feel the G-forces building as the nose tracked further down, loading up on the airframe, and at the same time I could smell, and this detail has never left me, I could smell the aviation fuel. Not the normal background smell of a working aircraft, the acute, immediate smell of JP4 in contact with hot metal. The smell that means the aircraft is on fire before your eyes have found the fire. Daniel was already talking. He was reading me the emergency hydraulics checklist from memory because there was no time to reach for the card. His voice was controlled. It was the voice of a man who had briefed this scenario in the simulator dozens of times and was now applying that briefing to an aircraft that was rotating through the vertical at altitude over hostile territory. He was doing his job, even then, especially then. I went through the checklist items he was calling out. I attempted the emergency hydraulic transfer. Nothing. The backup flight control mode. The aircraft did not respond. The stick was slack in my hand in a way that a stick should never be slack. It is a sensation I cannot adequately describe to anyone who has not experienced it. A fly-by-wire failure feels like being disconnected from your own nervous system. The aircraft is there, beneath you, around you, but it no longer hears you. The altimeter was passing through 18,000 feet. I called the ejection. Standard procedure for a two-seat aircraft is a simultaneous command. The front seat pulls the primary handle. The system fires the rear seat first by a fraction of a second to clear the front seat's trajectory, then the front seat fires. The whole sequence takes less than a second. You train it until it is reflex. You pull the handle, and you do not think. You simply pull. I pulled. The canopy detonation was correct. I felt it go. The explosive cord around the canopy frame fired, and the entire piece departed the aircraft cleanly, which told me the primary system had electrical continuity, which meant my seat fired. I was out of the aircraft, in the wind blast, the harness coming taut, the seat falling away beneath me as the drogue chute deployed, and I was already turning, already looking back at the aircraft, which was now a fireball, rotating through maybe 50 degrees nose low, still descending, still intact enough to recognize as an aircraft, and the rear cockpit was there, closed, no ejection, no seat, no Daniel. I screamed his name on the intercom. I do not know if I actually had intercom connectivity at that point. I do not know if he heard me, but I screamed his name, and then I heard his voice, which told me the radio link was still active, which told me he was alive, which told me there was still. He said, "Front seat's clear. Good shoot?" I looked up. My parachute was deployed and good. I said yes. He said, "Seat didn't fire. Metal's in the way. I can't reach the manual." The altimeter on his instrument panel would have been reading somewhere below 12,000 feet at that point. Below 12,000 feet, in that terrain, with the aircraft in that attitude, we both knew the math. There is no math class that teaches that equation. There is no simulator that runs that scenario. But we both knew it without needing to speak it. 11,000 feet. He said, "You know what you need to do?" I said his name again. I said it the way you say a name when you are asking a question that has no answer. He said, "Danny, listen to me. You know what the override does. You know where it is. Left console, forward of the throttle quadrant, yellow handle with the guard." I knew where it was. The manual disconnect. The system that pilots almost never discuss because the scenario in which you use it is a scenario no one wants to contemplate. The system that disconnects the rear seat from the firing sequence, that transfers full autonomous control of the ejection to the front seat operator. That means if you pull it and the rear seat fires afterward, it will fire because of something else, not because of you. It also means that if the rear seat cannot fire, it cannot fire. 10,000 feet. He said, "Pull it. That's an order. That's a direct order. And I want you to understand the weight of those words inside a flight suit, inside a parachute harness, at 10,000 feet, drifting away from an aircraft that contains your closest friend in the world. I want you to understand that Daniel Cruz did not say those words to give me permission. He said them because he knew me. He said them because he knew that without a direct order, I might find a reason, any reason, to believe there was another option. He said, "Carol knows. I already wrote it. Pull the damn handle." He had written a letter. He had written a letter to his wife because pilots who fly in combat write letters to their wives. And Daniel had written his, and he was telling me that Carol Cruz already knew that her husband loved her, that everything was accounted for, that the only unfinished business in the world at that moment was me. 9,000 feet. I pulled the manual override handle. There is a sound that an ejection makes. I know that sound from my own seat firing. It is percussive, violent, a detonation that you feel through your chest before you hear it through your ears. I did not hear that sound after I pulled the manual override. I heard nothing from the aircraft. I heard only the wind in the parachute lines and the distant rumble of the fire. I watched the aircraft impact the terrain from approximately 8,000 feet. The fireball was significant. That is the word I have used when I have been required to describe it in official contexts. Significant. It is a word that contains everything and says nothing. It is a pilot's word, a word for a report, a word that takes something that broke the world in half and files it neatly in a category that can be processed and documented and closed. The fireball was significant. I landed approximately 2 kilometers from the impact site. The ground team recovered me 40 minutes later. I had a compression fracture and 2 vertebrae from the ejection, which was standard. I had no other injuries. The official documentation described the mission outcome as follows. Aircraft lost to enemy action, 1 crew member recovered, 1 crew member killed in action. Killed in action. As if the action that killed Daniel Cruz was the missile. I have been asked many times across 4 decades whether I made the right decision. By psychologists in uniform. By pilots who flew with me afterward. By my own children once when they were old enough to ask. By myself, every morning, without exception, every morning since that day. I do not have an answer that satisfies anyone, including myself. The manual override was the correct tactical decision. The decision preserved 1 life when 2 lives were otherwise forfeit. The decision was made in compliance with a direct instruction from the senior surviving crew member. By every measure that exists in a framework of military aviation, the decision was correct. And I pulled that handle, and Daniel Cruz is dead. And those 2 facts exist in me simultaneously without ever resolving. I wore the medals they gave me. I completed my service. I instructed younger pilots in emergency procedures, and I described the ejection system with precision, and I never flinched when the scenario came up in briefings, because flinching is a luxury I decided I did not deserve. I went home. I got married. I had children. I watched those children grow up into people who do not know what their father carries, because what their father carries is not the kind of weight you put on a child. Carol Cruz remarried in 1991. Her daughter, Daniel's daughter, teaches school in Beaumont. I know this because I have kept track from a distance for 41 years, which is perhaps the only promise I have kept with perfect fidelity. The medals are in a box in the closet of my study. I do not display them, not out of false modesty, not out of some performed humility. I don't display them because a medal is something you give a man for what he did, and I know what I did. I know it with the precision that 41 years of middle-of-the-night reconstruction provides. I pulled a yellow handle with a guard over it, and I rode the wind down while my best friend rode the aircraft down. There are mornings when I stand in the kitchen and I drink my coffee and I watch the light come up over the yard, and I think about the fact that Daniel Cruz never stood in a kitchen and watched the light come up. He never watched his daughter graduate. He never had a morning that was simply quiet and ordinary in his. And I have had roughly 15,000 of those mornings. I count them. I have always counted them, because each one is borrowed. Each one is a morning that belongs to a 31-year-old man from Beaumont, Texas, with a gap between his front teeth, who told me in a calm voice over a dead intercom channel, over burning wreckage at 9,000 feet, that he already wrote the letter and that I should pull the damn handle. I pulled the handle. I am still here, and I will be standing in my kitchen again tomorrow morning, watching the light come up, counting